Let me set the scene for you. You're standing in a muddy, dark French forest in 1918. It's World War I, the world's gone mad, and there's no backup coming. No squad, no roaring artillery. Just you and a wounded friend surrounded by enemy soldiers. You have a rifle with barely any ammo, and a knife. That's it. That was Henry Johnson's reality. A railroad porter from Albany, New York, 5 feet 4, 130 pounds, not exactly the Hollywood version of a war hero.
If you enjoyed this breakdown, don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Your feedback helps shape what we cover next, and you being here keeps the conversation going. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.
He wasn't born into glory. He wasn't trained to be legendary. He just was when it mattered most. And somehow, that man became one of the most feared soldiers in Germany. But here's the twist. That wasn't even the hardest battle of his life. The real fight, the one that nearly erased his name from history, was waiting for him back home in America. So let's walk through his story. Not like a textbook, not with distant admiration, but up close. Because once you hear what this man did and how his country treated him for it, you'll realize Henry Johnson wasn't just a soldier. He was a mirror, and what America saw in that mirror, it wasn't ready to face. You've probably heard of the Harlem Hellfighters, the all-black regiment that fought under French command during World War I because the U.S. military didn't want to integrate its own soldiers. That's where Henry Johnson served. And that alone tells you almost everything about the time he lived in. America needed men, but not those men. Not until they were desperate. And yet, the French quickly learned what America refused to see. These soldiers were exceptional, hardened, disciplined, courageous, and when Johnson was tested, truly tested, his response was the stuff of legend. May 15, 1918. Night watch. The forest was quiet but not safe. Johnson and another soldier, Needham Roberts, are guarding their post when German troops emerge from the darkness and launch a raid. It's a coordinated attack, flashes of gunfire, grenades slicing through the air, shadowy figures closing in. Roberts is wounded almost immediately. Johnson has no choice. He picks up his rifle, fires until he's out of bullets, then grabs his knife. He charges into the fight. Up close, face to face, he kills 4 German soldiers, wounds many more, and defends his unconscious comrade alone. He's stabbed, shot, battered, but he does not stop. By the time it's over, Johnson has suffered 21 wounds. 21. And somehow, he's still standing. Germany gave him names: Black Death, the terror of the trenches. Names born not from hatred but from fear. France gave him something else, the Croix de Guerre, its highest honor. He was the first American to receive it during the war. Think about that. Not the first black American, the first American, period. And America gave him silence. See, that's the thing about heroism, it shouldn't depend on who's doing the saving. But in 1918 America, it did. Johnson returned home broken but proud. The crowds cheered. Newspapers praised him. For a moment, he tasted honor. And then he was forgotten. No medal, no pension, no medical benefits, not even his real name on his grave. From legend to invisible, the pain didn't end when he left the battlefield. It followed him. His wounds became a permanent disability. He couldn't return to his job. His body was a daily reminder of what he gave and of what he lost. And here's the cruelest detail. When he testified about the horrors of war and the neglect of black veterans, he was punished for speaking out. He was labeled a liar. His records were buried. His heroism was erased like chalk on a rainy sidewalk. He spent the rest of his life in poverty. And when he died young, in his 30s, he was buried in Arlington Cemetery, under the wrong name. He fought like a warrior, but died like a ghost. So why tell this story now? Because here's what's wild: it almost vanished forever. If not for researchers, historians, and advocates who refused to give up his name, Henry Johnson wouldn't be in the history books. And that's the entire point. History doesn't always erase people. Sometimes it simply waits to see if anyone cares enough to bring them back. It took nearly 8 decades for the U.S. to give him any medal. He finally received the Purple Heart in 1996, the Distinguished Service Cross in 2002, and in 2015, 97 years after the battle, President Obama awarded him the Medal of Honor. 97 years later, almost a century. That's how long it took to give this man what he earned in one night with a knife and sheer willpower. And you can't help but ask, why did history stall for so long? Was it paperwork, oversight, bureaucracy, or was it something else? That's the uncomfortable question. Because this isn't just Henry Johnson's story. It's the story of black soldiers across history who fought for freedoms they were not allowed to fully enjoy, who risked their lives abroad to return to a country where they were still told, not your seat, not your door, not your place. That tension, that split between courage and country is why this story matters now more than ever. Johnson's courage wasn't just physical, it was symbolic. It exposed the gap between words and actions, between ideals and reality. And that gap is still here. Today, his name lives on. A fort in Louisiana now bears his name, Fort Johnson. His ribbons and medals are recognized. His legacy is secure. But his struggle, that's ongoing. Because how many stories like his are still buried? How many soldiers never got the recognition they earned? How many names were quietly tucked away, not because their deeds weren't incredible but because their skin wasn't the right color for history to remember? And here's something to think about. Even when Johnson's own country tried to erase him, his enemies remembered. The Germans feared him. The French honored him. Which makes America's silence feel even louder. Because if courage is universal, why isn't recognition? Henry Johnson may not have lived to see his name restored, but he showed the world something timeless. Bravery doesn't need permission. And history isn't finished until the truth is told. So here's the question I'll leave you with: if a railroad porter from Albany can face an army with nothing but a knife and determination, what does that say about what humans are capable of? And what does it say about how we choose to remember them? Let me know what you think. Should history be rewritten when it gets it wrong? And how many more Henry Johnsons are still waiting to be found? If this story hit you, share it. Subscribe for more. Because history isn't just about the past. It's about what we choose to honor today. And sometimes, it takes 21 wounds and one knife to change the future. Let's stay with that image for a second because it's burned into my brain now. One man, bleeding from over 20 wounds, gripping a knife in the blacked-out woods of northern France. Alone, outnumbered, outgunned, and somehow not outmatched. That's not just battlefield bravery. That's something else. That's raw, unfiltered defiance. It's the kind of moment that belongs in movies. Except the man at the center of it wasn't the kind of hero Hollywood wanted to spotlight in 1918, or in 1950, or in 1980. For nearly 100 years, his name barely cracked the surface of mainstream history, because Henry Johnson wasn't just fighting Germans. He was fighting the very structure of erasure. And that, honestly, is what makes his story hit so hard. He won the fight we all know how to root for: the heroic last stand, the impossible odds, the physical courage. But he lost the quiet battle that so many black Americans have been forced to fight for generations. The battle for acknowledgement. Because let's be honest, if Henry Johnson had been white, we wouldn't be telling this story like it's a rediscovered secret. His name would be in textbooks. Streets and schools would bear it. You'd hear kids learning about him in history class next to Patton and Pershing. There'd be statues. But instead, it took until 2015 for America to say, actually, we got this one wrong. And sure, a posthumous Medal of Honor is powerful, symbolic, necessary. But it's also a reminder of how long justice can take when the system isn't built for you. This is what people mean when they talk about systemic racism. It's not about individual hatred, it's about who gets remembered, who gets honored, who gets buried with dignity, and who gets misnamed in the dirt. And Henry Johnson wasn't alone. Thousands of black soldiers fought in World War I. Many saw action. Many died. And many, like Johnson, returned to a country that had zero intention of treating them like heroes. They came back wearing uniforms, medals, and pride, and were met with racial slurs, lynch mobs, and Jim Crow laws. Some were beaten in public just for wearing their uniforms. Imagine that. You survive trench warfare in France only to be told you're too proud for walking down a street in your own damn uniform. So when we talk about the courage of Henry Johnson, we have to widen the frame. His knife fight in the forest was just one chapter. The harder part, living in a world where his service didn't seem to matter, where bleeding for the flag got you no more rights than before. But here's the thing, he kept talking. He didn't fade away quietly. Even after the government turned its back on him, he spoke out. Told anyone who would listen about the mistreatment of black veterans, about what he and others had done overseas and how they were being forgotten. And that was brave too. Because in 1920s America, a black man publicly criticizing the government didn't just earn disapproval. It earned danger. But Johnson did it anyway. Because he knew something that still resonates today. Silence is the accomplice of injustice. Now, let's talk about what it took to bring his name back. It wasn't a quick fix. It wasn't some Hollywood historian stumbling onto an old photo. It took years of digging, decades of advocacy. Historians combed through faded war records. Activists lobbied Congress. Veterans groups pushed for recognition. And still it moved at a crawl. At one point, his own birth date wasn't even certain. There was confusion over his middle name. His military records were incomplete. It was like trying to assemble a hero's legacy from puzzle pieces someone had deliberately scattered. But people kept going. They kept asking, why doesn't he have a Purple Heart? Why not a Distinguished Service Cross? Why not the Medal of Honor? And when they realized the answer was racism and neglect, they didn't stop pushing. That's why this story isn't just about a man, it's about persistence. About the people who refuse to let a hero vanish. About the power of truth, even when it's buried under a century of dust. By the time President Obama stood at the podium in 2015 and finally awarded Henry Johnson the Medal of Honor, it felt like justice exhaled. Like history corrected itself just a little bit. But even that moment was bittersweet, because Johnson wasn't there to see it. He never knew the world would come around. He died poor, injured, ignored. His medals were handed to family members who probably spent their whole lives wondering if the country would ever do right by him. And that's the part that hits the hardest. We love to celebrate heroes after they're gone. We're good at posthumous praise, at renaming things and holding ceremonies and saying, this should have happened sooner. But wouldn't real justice be giving people their flowers while they're still breathing? While they're still limping through life with bullet wounds and back pain missing? Henry Johnson didn't need a statue. He needed a surgeon, a job, a pension, a thank you. He needed a country that matched his loyalty with respect. Instead, he got silence. And yet his story still triumphs. Because it proves something undeniable. Courage doesn't wait for permission. Johnson didn't need America to validate his bravery. He was bravery. He didn't fight for medals. He fought because someone needed to. Because that was the right thing to do. Because when the bullets flew and the grenades landed, he chose to protect his friend even if it meant dying in the dirt, knife in hand. That's why we remember him now. Not just because of what he did but how he did it. Without glory. Without backup. Without even the promise that anyone would ever say his name again. But we are saying it now. Loudly. Henry Johnson. And if that name means something to you, if this story struck a nerve, then ask yourself how many other names are still missing. How many other lives were heroic but forgotten? And how can we make sure they don't stay buried? Because this isn't just a story about the past. It's a mirror we're holding up to the present. When we honor Henry Johnson, we're not just rewriting one soldier's history, we're rewriting the kind of history we value. One that doesn't just belong to generals and presidents, but to porters, to privates, to the people who fought, and bled, and died without applause. That's how we make the record whole again. One name at a time. So let's end with this. If you've got a name, a relative, a story that hasn't been told, share it. Talk about it. Ask the questions. Push the system. Because history doesn't preserve itself. It has to be defended, just like a trench. And sometimes, that defense starts with a voice. One voice. One story. One knife. One soldier who wouldn't give up. Henry Johnson. Let's never forget him again. Because when you say never forget, you have to mean it. It can't just be something carved on a plaque or tossed out at a Veterans Day event. Never forget means remembering even when it's uncomfortable. Even when the truth challenges the stories we were taught. Especially when it does. And Henry Johnson's truth. It's jagged. It's not neat or sanitized. It doesn't come with a clean ending or a glossy textbook paragraph. It's a reminder that the heroes we celebrate are often not the ones who were treated like heroes at the time. And isn't that the uncomfortable part? That the soldier who risked everything, who quite literally bled for this country, came home and was treated like a problem. Think about the layers of that. He saved a man's life, held off an enemy raid, became a symbol of American bravery on French soil. Only to return to a country that didn't even care enough to spell his name right on his grave. That's not just tragic. That's deliberate erasure. Because someone chose not to write his story down. Someone chose not to process his medal paperwork. Someone chose to let him fade into obscurity. And yet here we are talking about him, 100 years later. Because the truth has a way of coming back. It always does. Even when you try to bury it under decades of silence and indifference, it cracks the surface. Henry Johnson didn't ask to be remembered. He just asked to be treated fairly, with dignity, like a man who did his duty, like a soldier who served. That's not a big ask. That's the bare minimum. But even now, stories like his don't always make it to the spotlight, because they complicate the narrative. They force people to confront the contradiction between what America says it values, courage, loyalty, sacrifice, and how it has actually treated many of the people who embodied those things. And this isn't just about race. It's about who gets to be remembered, who gets their face on murals, whose names are chanted at ball games, whose history gets taught. It's about broadening the definition of heroism to include those who were heroic in the shadows, who weren't allowed to bask in the glory because of their skin, their background, or their silence after the war. So yeah, say his name, Henry Johnson. Tell someone about him. Tell your kids, your friends, your teachers. Make him more than a footnote. Make him part of the legacy. Because remembering isn't just about the past. It's about reshaping the future. And if we can remember one porter from Albany who stood his ground in a forest with nothing but a knife and a will to survive, then maybe we can start doing justice for the countless others who still wait in the shadows, unheard, unthanked, and undefeated. It's not too late to make it right, but it is long overdue. And here's the wildest thing: he never asked for any of this. Not the medals, not the ceremonies, not the fame. Henry Johnson didn't charge into that fight in France thinking, this'll look great on a plaque someday. He wasn't chasing glory. He was just trying to survive, trying to protect his friend, trying to do what soldiers are trained to do, hold the line, no matter the odds. He didn't get justice. He didn't even get his name right on a tombstone. Like, how do you mess up the bare minimum for someone who nearly died doing his job? This is why stories like his hit so deep. They expose the cracks in the foundation. They force you to ask the hard questions, like, what else have we overlooked? Who else have we forgotten? How many other heroes are lying in unmarked graves, or quietly fading from memory because no one fought for them the way they fought for us? Because the truth is, Henry Johnson wasn't some one in a million exception. He was one of many. One of thousands of black soldiers, indigenous fighters, immigrant troops, people who gave everything in the name of a country that refused to see them. And that's not just a failure of the military. That's a failure of history. A failure of national memory. But it doesn't have to stay that way. That's why we tell these stories. Not to guilt-trip people. Not to rewrite history, but to complete it. To add in the chapters that were ripped out. To make sure future generations know that patriotism doesn't look just one way. That bravery isn't owned by any one group. That sacrifice comes in all shades. Henry Johnson, the Black Death, the railroad porter turned legend, the soldier who fought two wars, one in France, one at home, and never got to see himself win either. But maybe, just maybe, if we keep telling his story, he'll win the third. Thanks so much for watching. If you made it all the way to the end, you're officially part of the small percentage of people who don't just click away, and that means a lot. Before you go, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell me your thoughts, your ideas, or even what you'd like to see next. I read every single one of them, and your feedback genuinely shapes the direction of this channel. If you enjoyed the video, tap that like button. It tells YouTube this content is worth sharing. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next upload. We've got more exciting videos coming, and trust me, you'll want to be here for them. This channel is just getting started, and your support helps it grow faster than you realize. Thank you again for spending a part of your day here with me. Stay curious, stay motivated, and as always, take care of yourself. Until next time, I'll see you in the next video.